This podcast is brought to you by Ride IQ. Ride IQ is a first-of-its-kind equestrian coaching platform that will transform your independent schooling rides. Ride IQ members get access to the private mobile app with hundreds of on-demand listen-while-you-ride audio lessons taught by the world's top eventing, hunter-jumper, and dressage coaches. Membership is only $29.99 per month, and every membership automatically includes a free trial when you sign up at ride-iq.com. On today's episode of In Stride, Sinead interviews Dr. Jenny Susser. Dr. Susser has a PhD in clinical health psychology with a specialization in sports psychology. Her interest in human performance began with her own athletic career. Dr. Susser was a 4-year All-American swimmer and competed at the 1988 Olympic trials. Since retiring from swimming, Dr. Susser has helped athletes in nearly every Summer Olympic Games since 2004. In 2012, she was the team sports psychologist for the U.S. Olympic dressage team in London. Dr. Susser's experience also extends beyond sports. She helps corporate leaders perform in high-pressure and high-stakes situations. Today, Sinead and Dr. Susser discuss gender bias in equestrian sports. We hope you enjoy this episode. All right. Well, I am so excited to have Dr. Jenny Susser here on our podcast. Jenny, we used to get to do this all the time. We used to get to just hang out and brainstorm.
Drink coffee.
Yes, I miss the coffee. I mean, I miss you, but I miss the coffee. The coffee. I mean, let's be real. Anyway, you've had a really great introduction already to our viewers about your long resume. And how we actually met was, I think we originally met, were we at Kentucky? Were we at Rolex when we originally?
You know, our first meeting was at dinner at Linda Pirelli's. That's the first time.
Oh my God. That was a really funny dinner. Yeah.
That was a really funny dinner. Yeah.
That's for another podcast.
His dad was there, so.
Yeah. That ended very funny. And then, that was a very entertaining evening. And then our paths crossed again at Kentucky, and you were getting involved with the high performance side of eventing. And then we ended up actually becoming friends over some horses. And then I obviously seeked out your expertise and would text you constantly and say, can we have some mind game time, please? And here we are several years later, and we're still friends after all of that. Can you imagine?
All of that, I know, right?
Well, what we have, we're really excited here at Ride IQ because we're trying to kind of, again, kind of expand the education and inspiration side of things and help a lot of our clients or people that are listening are adult amateur riders. We've got a lot of professional riders on here as well, and trying to make sure that everybody feels like, that a lot of the work to be done isn't always in the saddle, right? Isn't always kind of working on the heels down. It's actually probably 10% of that, right? And a lot of it needs to be done, personally and internally, and that'll only help the horses, obviously. So I think today we wanted to focus a little bit on, being a woman in the sport, staying motivated in the sport, in life and horses, and and the perspective from there. So, why don't we just run with that? What do you think about all of those things? Go.
Well, I think that, I guess I've been a sports psychologist for 20 years, and have been working in equestrian only for about 10 of those years. I sort of resisted it, said, you know what, I don't want to wreck my hobby. But then just couldn't resist, obviously. But, it's interesting because equestrian was super late to the game in terms of sports psychology. And when I first started peddling my wares, people were like, do you work with the horse or the rider? Which was, 10 years ago, a funny question. Today, it's a little bit less questionable, but but the interesting thing is like in high performance sport, we focus so much on the physical aspect, on
Yeah.
the mechanics, the the technical, tactical, strategic parts of the physical training, and we are just really it's every Olympic cycle, it increases in importance, and
Mhm.
always something that happens that will sort of blow up mentally, sports psychology wise, during any games, and then that raises the awareness, and then people start calling, and then it creates a better conversation about it. And if we worked as hard on our mental game as we work on our physical game, sport and life would be really different. I mean, how many hours do you ride a day?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. A lot. Yeah. 8 on a good day. These
On a
days, not
good,
as many, but
yes, for various and sundry reasons, but
yeah. If I could ride 8 hours a day, but I should be spending more time than obviously in my brain.
well, a little bit more, yeah. And you know that, and you embrace that, and I think that you've worked really hard at that, and received a lot of benefit and payout
Yeah.
from that work. I mean, everybody does. It's like a bank account. The more you put in, the more you invest, the more you can take out across across time. So I think that it's super cool. I love it that people are interested in it. I love it that people are thinking about it. I love it that people are struggling with it. And it's so women and motivation and sport, and especially in the equestrian world. The equestrian world is interesting in terms of women in sport, because men and women compete equally, like same exact playing field, supposedly. Although women make up like the greater percentage of participants in the sport, men still make up, if not more than 50% of the participants on teams and in a high performance arena, and in the decision-making places. There's still quite a few, I'm not exactly sure of the numbers, but it's not, the 70% women that it is, out in the barns and in the
Yeah.
training arenas.
And do
I
you
saw
see that across a lot of sports, or is that mainly in equestrian? Mainly in
Well, like I said, equestrian's like the weird sport because men and women compete
together. Yeah,
equally.
yeah,
What we've seen in women's sports historically is that, for a women's sport, or that men are still making the decisions, right?
right.
When I was at UCLA, we were one of the few colleges back then. So I was at UCLA in the 80s, and we actually had a female athletic director. So we had Dr. Judith Holland, who's like an icon in Title IX women's sports. She was the associate athletic director, and she ran the women's side, which was very unusual.
Yeah.
And she actually gave the first, UCLA distributed the first women's NCAA Division I scholarship to Ann Myers, the basketball player, once Title IX passed. So,
Wow.
but that was really, really unusual, especially across the board. You don't really see that. But equestrian is different because men and women compete against each other.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like in terms of childcare and birth, I mean, Tick's not really carrying much of this child, right? So.
It's carrying the weight of my attitude. Yeah. But it's funny though, because it's like, I mean, I find myself such a believer in the sports psychology side of things. And like you said, like I put a lot of work into it when honestly it was downtime, and I was pregnant with Brooks like 3 years ago, right? Which is crazy. That was 3 years ago. And I came to you and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be out of the saddle for a while. I need to not, I need to not get left behind, basically, which was the fear, like, there were so many unknowns of, am I going to be scared? Am I going to be as motivated? Am I going to be, and you're like, you're going to be whatever you want to be. Like, it doesn't matter, but we can do this in the meantime, to kind of keep feeling like your skill sets are improving. or you're working a different set of skill sets while this set over here has to take a little break. And it's interesting though, because I find myself sometimes, I mean, I'll just admit it. Sometimes I hear kind of this, like some, and it's probably because it's coming from some of the younger generation and some people. And I get like, when I was your age, I did all of this. And then I'm hearing words from these kids like, I'm so burnt out. I'm like, you worked 4 hours. You got up you said 7 a.m. was early. 7 a.m. is not early. Like, but I'm like, you started your sentence wrong there. But it's kind of that back and forth of trying to grow and be on the right side of this, but also not be weighed down by it, if that makes sense. Not think that there's a problem. It just is something that needs attention. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is like if our mental game was referred to like our physical game is, there'd be no problem. Like sports psychology would be woven into it.
Right.
The best individual athletes and teams that I've worked with, the sports like I'm woven in as part of the deal. Like the strength coach. Like I worked with a professional tennis player for a couple of years, and the player was in the top 10 in the world. And our team, like when I started working with a player, they weren't in the top 10 in the world. And then we just like the team really cohered, right? We had the head coach, we had the strength coach, we had the daily coach, we had the nutrition, we had the agent, we had the mom, we had all the different elements, and we all met all the time to be like, okay, here's how we're coming at this. Here's how to best support this athlete. And it worked really well for a good chunk of time. And that's, when I've worked with different teams, or even when I work with executive teams, when they take that same kind of approach that, that it's part of it. Like, it's not the most important part, but it's certainly not the least important part. And at times it's going to be most important, and at times it's going to be least important. Right. And so you try to figure out how to weave it in there so that it has a powerful role. But, we don't have a super great relationship culturally, even especially in Western cultures, to tending to our mental health. Right. Now everybody's waiting to get sick before they start to tend to their mental health, or they think I've got to have a problem to go talk to a psychologist. But, there's Eastern medical philosophies where the job of the doctor is to keep you healthy,
right?
Not a return to health from disease, but prevent disease, right?
Keep everything balanced. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So when I get an athlete that calls and they're like, listen, I feel really good, I just want to like break the world record. I'm like, I'm down with that, like, and there's always stuff to work on, but we tend to wait until we're critical, and then it's hard, right? Then the work's even harder.
Yeah.
And when the work is super hard, people get discouraged. And, you might even think about this from like measuring mental toughness, mental health, mental gain is a lot harder than, I'm 2/10 faster on my 50 freestyle right now. Or, I went from 2-star to 3-star.
Right.
So,
I think that's a really interesting point, because it's like you go and see a sports psychologist when you're so nervous you can't remember your dressage test, or that's, or I'm panicking because of this, or I'm stressed out about this, as opposed to like we don't even think twice about going to get a lesson once a week and having someone say, we can get better at this, we can get better at that, and you're like, sure, like that sounds great. And then you evolve from that point instead of feeling, and I guess that maybe is where the stigma comes from, is that, like you said, being at such a critical state and then feeling like that's the normal time to reach out, as opposed to just when everything feels okay, either keeping it okay and balanced or improving, becoming the norm. Trying to weave that in.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always interesting to me, and it's evolving, and I like the way that the progress is going, because more and more people are interested in it. I always kind of joke and say, really my job is to make your life as boring as possible. If I'm doing my job well and you're doing your homework, your life is boring, right? We're just kind of trucking along, and you're not falling apart. Crises
Yeah.
are few and far between, much more so than they used to be. And people don't really like, we're in such a weird state culturally right now, like across the world, but especially here in the US, where like everybody's sort of waiting for a shoe to drop every day.
Yeah.
And you turn that into a habit, and then that becomes the thing that you're looking for all the time. And then we're at all these elevated states, and burnout is now the term that's kind of gone viral. It was exhaustion, then it was resilience, now it's burnout. And but they're all versions of the same thing, which is pedal to the metal, no coming off the gas, more, nothing's ever enough.
Right.
And trying to find that satisfaction it's challenging, even for me, like I know all this stuff, I still wrestle with it.
Yeah. It's like one thing knowing it and then putting it into practical use sometimes. So what do we do? Tell us the magic answers. Where do we start?
Well, I think the conversations are the best place to start. Like there's so much available, and finding the right people the right conversations to have, I think is also really important. There are a lot of people out there who are having conversations that, if you don't feel it, if it doesn't make you feel better in your heart, then it's probably not the right thing to be listening to or following.
Right.
That's sort of my mantra. Like when I listen to someone and I kind of get that, then I'm like, okay, so if you're listening to this and you're getting that, turn it off.
Don't turn it off. Keep listening.
Yeah. But, I think that we're all like to continue to push and press and learn is always a challenge. I think one of the things that's really been cool over the last chunk of time, especially the last decade, is the way that women have sort of risen above where we were before. And that was, when you and I and Meta were, collaborating, that was really what we were about, was, okay, how do we get a little more power in the bucket for women? Yeah. And I saw this really interesting cartoon. I tried to find it today online, but I couldn't. And it was like a starting line on a track, right? And the track arcs around, and there's all the different lanes. And the first 3 lanes were women, and then the second 3 lanes were men, and they're dressed in corporate attire. But in the lanes, as you go around the bend, for the first 3 lanes for women, there was a washing machine, then a stove, then a crib, then a vacuum cleaner, then like there were all these
hurdles,
and then a primary school and a carpool, and then a soccer ball, and it made me stop and think. Like the visual was so fantastic. Like we're not all starting at the same place. We're really not. And so can we ever? No, but can we raise awareness so that some of that stuff changes? And when we first started talking about doing this podcast, and you said, I'd love to talk about motivation. And motivation is a funny, like, it's really like, that's sports psychology, motivation, how motivated are you? But I learned early on in my career that when someone comes in my office and sits down and says, I'm having a motivation problem, it's never about motivation. It's always about something else. Could be, there was a Freudian slip, right? Someone else. Could be. Could be. Who knows? But that I never have anyone come into my office and go, I was so motivated for practice today. That's not something that you hear. So when someone says that they're lacking motivation, then I always know it's a little bit of a deeper issue. So from a sports psychology perspective, when you talk about motivation, there's 2 different kinds of drivers that we have that move our motivation, internal and external. So if you took Psych 101, you might remember intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators, right? And those are just fancy words for internal and external.
Yeah.
Then it's kind of having a healthy dose of both is where your power comes from and where your motivation comes from. It's kind of like hard and soft goals. If you have all all one kind of goal, if you have all big outcome, got to get it done, score, place, all that, and you don't have any of the softer goals, which are, how I feel, my connection with my horse, did I improve? What am I,
Right.
whatever you're working on. It's the same thing with the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivators. And when people come in and sit down or call me up and they say, motivation, I'm lacking motivation, or I'm struggling with motivation, it's almost always that the external motivators, the extrinsic stuff, has completely taken over, and they've either disconnected from or lost sight of the internal intrinsic motivation, which is the why, the purpose, the meaning, the things, your internal intrinsic motivators are why you do your sport. So I could ask you, like, why do you ride? And you could answer me
Right now.
why not? You put me on the spot.
I know. I was like, whoa. I think I feel very at home and at peace with horses. I feel pretty connected there, and I love the evolution of it. I love the competition side because I feel like it keeps me motivated. So maybe that's the external part of it. And the internal part of it is, the connection part to me feels probably one of the most genuine things in my life, honestly. So it gets me out of bed pretty much. I don't have to look. It's probably one of the few things that I rarely have to seek motivation for, is riding. Some of the stuff around it, like some of the teaching and some of the clinicking and some of the traveling and that stuff, sometimes I have to give myself a pep talk, but normally getting on a horse doesn't take much.
Yeah, that's super awesome. And so you see, like, those are, so your external motivators are like money, fame, power, position, a team, money,
horse sports,
right? And so those are the ones that can get tough. But if imagine you lost connection to your horse or your love for horses, then riding would just be a chore.
Well, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and there was one period of time where I had a lot of struggles with some external situations revolving around some horses, and it was awful. And it was probably and I said, it's the only time in my whole life I thought about quitting. And it was, and it never, I mean, I'd been in hospitals and broken bones and, awful things and, emotional struggles and breakups and all that stuff around horses. And it never crossed my mind. And then there was this kind of external thing that was going on for about a year. And it was the first time I ever thought about quitting, but I didn't even think about it till right now, but it was like disconnecting me from my internal, like it just black clouded everything, like I was like, I don't want to participate in this anymore, which was pretty powerful. Yeah.
That's super powerful.
See, we're already having a session. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we get stuck. And and unless you have someone to talk to, whether they're professional or not, unless you've got someone who can help you tease some of that stuff out, like, we get really stuck in our head about it. I have a new friend that I met recently, and she's a psychotherapist, and her son was a baseball player and got really badly injured this year and missed a year. And she's like, he keeps coming to me and saying, Mom, I'm not sure I'm motivated. And I said to her, I'm like, he doesn't want to play anymore. And she's like, what do you mean he doesn't want to play? I'm like, he doesn't want to play anymore.
Right.
I could just hear it, after all these years of knowing. And I think that that's one of the really difficult things in sport, because you love it so much. Like, no matter what sport you're in, if you played a sport to beyond, let's say beyond high school, if you played a sport beyond high school, like college, or on a professional level, like equestrian's weird in terms of professional, but that's another story. But if you play, like if you, or anything beyond high school, if you stayed with it and were highly competitive, quitting or transitioning from sport is really confusing, because you still have that internal love, but then the external motivators shift and they become no longer motivating. So then you're trying to figure out like, how do I stay true to my sport? And when is it time?
Mhm.
And, you know, when is it time to go? And there's no answer. There's no set answer for that. But what I often see in women and horses is pulling that trigger way too early because of their lack of success. So the
Right.
problem, one of the big problems, and I'm like the fear shrink, right? So I've sort of carved this niche dealing with fear and been able to really decipher and help people unpack what's got them so damn scared, other than the reality of a 1,200, 1,500 pound animal. And not even talk about what eventers do, because you guys just not right anyway. But
Well, we have to keep you in business.
if only you came and talked to me, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's, you know, no matter what, being around it, you know, livestock is dangerous no matter what. So then you have this unbelievable love, like you speak of, like I have with my horses and why I'm in horses. And then you have the fear. And that's where, like, I have a lot of friends who don't ride who are like, wait a second, you work with people who have these super expensive, very big, heavy, dangerous animals. Why do they keep going? And I don't know how to explain this like to a non-horse person, but that's the internal external motivation wrestling match. Right? Because most of the women who are afraid haven't had good training, they haven't had good guidance. You know, we have an interesting model in the US where anyone can be a trainer. I don't think we've really understood horses very clearly. I think we're starting to gain some traction there. And it was really the people who, like you, could jump on and ride anything when they were young, that we all just sort of followed like Pied Pipers, you know, like, okay, she can do it. Well, she can either do my horse or maybe she can, some of that will rub off if I spend enough time near her. And so motivation is this weird thing. Like, women who are afraid are really heavily motivated to be around their horses and to pay a lot of money for somebody else to be able to do their horse. And it's been really interesting to watch over the last decade, and try and figure out how to help with that. And, you know, it comes down to about, I would say, 100 different factors.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tease out. So, but I think that it's something that's worth looking at within yourself, and finding, if you are struggling, like if you're listening to this and you're going, okay, yes, 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 what do I do? You know, how do I solve this puzzle? You really have to step back and get some perspective. And try to tease out, you know, you and I love to work together no matter what we're doing, because we are both crazy about our lists. And our tablets and our remarkables and all those things. And so getting some perspective, you know, like pulling back, getting some perspective and figuring out, you know, what works and what doesn't work. And it's not a one and done. You're not going to sit down with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and take out your pad and make a pros and cons list or a working, not working list. And at the end of one session, have any kind of resolution. I think it's a much longer journey. Like, how did you get yourself out of that year of darkness?
That wine. No.
Coffee in the morning, wine at night.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of it, I had to make some strong compromises to just be done with the situation I was in, and get an exit strategy, because I felt like the longer the situation got drawn out, the more I got sucked down into it, and I just couldn't be in that energy. And then I honestly, I kind of, for several years, I avoided anything that looked like, smelled like, talked like that type of situation. And it was, and focused on some other things, you know, like that's when we worked on buying a farm, and we had our first child, and kind of got that part of our lives sorted out. And to be honest, I've just gotten kind of brave enough in the last little while to start engaging back in that direction again. And it's funny, and I'll share a very personal story that happened probably like 2 weeks ago. You'll laugh at this, even though I was not laughing at the time. But it was actually, Tick was really great because I was having just a bad day. And, I'm 8.5 months pregnant, and I just was pissed off, and, all this stuff was going on in the barn, and Tick was in a great mood and bouncing all over the place like he does. And, I was kind of having a real victim, like poor me time. And he came in about something, and I said, you just don't get it. You just won't understand. Like, you're just a guy in this sport, and you just get these horses, and these people come to you, and blah, 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 blah. And you will never know what this feels like. And Tick is like pretty easygoing, and he said to me, he's like, this victim stuff does not look good on you. Yeah. Which I was like, what? I was expecting, can I get you something, sweetheart? I know I don't understand. And he said, from the time I met you, like 10, 15 years ago or whatever, you were very like strong about what you wanted and where you were going and what you were doing. And I don't really see that right now. I don't really know what you're doing, but we're at the point in our life where you need to like take some risks and get up and say what you want and do what you want to do. Like, get over it. Isn't that crazy? I know, you're like speechless. This came from Tick. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it was and this, pulling back to what you were saying a second ago about your external group, like I trust Tick obviously immensely. And, in 10 years, he hasn't said something that strong to me, but that meant when he said it, I listened, and he knows me well enough, and I needed it. Right. And so it's funny, the timing, because the next day I had a very big decision to make about a horse, and it was a big risk to make this decision. And unfortunately, I went to him, and he helped me make the decision, because I said, yesterday when you told me I needed to take some risks, well, can I do this? Can I buy this horse? I know I should be spending this money on this, this, and this, but but I still have these dreams, and I still want to do this. And he said, you know what? And he said, we kind of got 10 years in this thing. He said, F it, just do it. And but it's funny because that came full circle. But this is probably the last year has been the first time I've been brave enough to step back and expose myself into some situations that had me in that place before that I so disliked. But I feel like I built up the foundation, and my external group feels safer, like it feels better. And tying back to that external thing and the fear thing, I mean, I was just teaching today, and I teach a lot of people obviously that have the fear, and I can relate to that, the fear. Yeah, that thing. But it's, and we've had this discussion a lot. It's crazy how many people will tell people that are in that genuine state of fear to just get over it, just do it anyway, just toughen out, and it's that's not safe, like that's not safe anywhere. Even if you think, like today I had someone, and I thought, and I knew I've taught her for long enough, I knew she was safe. And so I pushed the envelope a little bit, and it was successful and great. But it was real, like, you do this one time, I promise you can get to the other side of this, and you can jump this one, it'll be great. And it was great and elevated. But I've been teaching her for 4 months, and we started very, very slow. But you can see how much that external team or group or whatever, how important that is, especially when it has to do with, I didn't even put that into the motivation category until you started talking about it that way. But that could be, I mean, it's huge. It's a huge part of it.
Sure. There's absolutely nothing wrong with getting some of your external motivation from the people in your life.
Yeah.
I actually think that's really
to be the right people.
That's true. That's very true. But, nobody lives in a vacuum, and no man is an island, and we need each other. And,
yeah.
And when, I get a lot of my motivation from meta for sure, like, and if I'm feeling a little like I'm uncertain or I'm unsure or feeling unworthy or whatever, I know I can count on her to be that check. Like, yeah, you're totally in your lane. Go, dive, get in there, get swimming, or maybe you need a skill or two before you can get into that lane, or are you sure you want to widen your lane to that? Or,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And vice versa. And I think that as like, I think for men, it's really different, confidence, motivation, those things, they exist differently for men based on part brain wiring. We're different species and genders. Yeah. And then the other part is, like what's in the way and like how, like how we've been raised, men have been raised to be like, yeah, you can do it. Like, I mean, you're about to have a girl and you're going to see the difference and the way that you're going to catch yourself talking to her differently than you talk to Brooks. And you're going to go, oh,
yeah.
did that just come out of my mouth?
Yeah.
And but it's programming, like it's culture. It's like where we came from, Barbie versus Ken. Now it's not intentional, and probably the people who started it wasn't intentional, but it's where it's at. And so as we continue to raise the awareness bar and get this going in a better direction, then we have more skills. But then now it becomes up to us to be able to check ourselves or have someone like Tick check us and say, okay, now how do I get out of that old set of habits? And that's really hard. And having a team and a trainer, teacher, guide, mentor that you can trust is really, really critical. And our problem in the horse world, and we've talked about the design of the model in the horse world and how bad it is for just about everyone. Like I'm just trying, like how many hours have we sat around trying to figure out who is it really good for? It's not really that good for the horses. It's tough on trainers, it's tough on owners, it's tough on riders, tough on farriers, really tough on veterinarians, salespeople, like I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think as we're trying to creep towards that, especially as women, to really stop and check and see, like, is this matching and lining up with what I want to do, who I am, what I'm up to?
Yeah. And
I think that I don't think that we've been encouraged enough to ask those questions. Like, well, what do you want? A lot of times people call me up and they're like, well, I need to do this and I need to do that. And I need to get over my fear because I have to do this. And so-and-so says I should do that. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, what is it that you would like?
A burger and fries.
That's pregnancy talking.
What do I want right now?
It's super hard to know, especially if people have been in the sport for a long time and been successful or not. I think it's two sides of the same coin. If you've had a ton of success, it's still, is this what you want? If you've had no success, it's still, is this what you want? And really super challenging. Is this making sense?
Yeah. I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing is just having that awareness. I mean, I think that's the big thing that we're talking about is having that awareness of what is real, what's in front of you, having that check, whether it's internal, like you can sit down and you can write down, okay, what is my why? Why am I here? What am I doing? What's getting me out of bed in the morning? Or you have an external check of like, am I in the right situation and someone that you trust? Like, what do I really want? Because it's so easy to get into that. You just get swept away into the common, like, this is what everybody's doing. This is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. And it's interesting, especially in the horse sports and probably sport and business in general, is that, and especially with social media and everything, is that you feel like everybody's doing better than you, doing it, like going on vacation, being happy, winning everything, everything's awesome. And you're like, what am I doing wrong? They have these owners and this or that or whatever. And it's not true. And everybody is having, their own individual struggles or things, or coming at things in different ways. I mean, I think that's one of the awesome things about horses is that there's so many different ways to be involved. There's not one lane of traffic, that you need to stay in. But I think you can get swept up in this general idea of what you're supposed to be doing or how you're supposed to be doing it or how it's always been done, which can be, you don't even know that you're in that lane. You're just going along with the traffic, right? You're just kind of in a wolf pack of it. So having a check and coming back and being like, what am I doing? And, I think that's something that in the last little while is the first time I've sat back a couple of times when I've been in pressurized situations and recognized that the only person putting on pressure on me is me, where I've really kind of gone like, who's making me do, oh, and I think, but it is from, probably the culture I've been raised in and the situations I've been in. And then it's just kind of this story I've been telling myself for a really long time. And I didn't even realize I was the only I was at the mic, doing that at some point. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing to dissect and figuring out how to do that. I guess that's, how do we do that? Where do we start?
I think what happens if we frame this in the internal versus external motivator languaging, I think that could be kind of fun because I've never gone this far in this conversation. So I'm kind of enjoying this as a challenge because I've never thought this way. But when we lose, I think we got to start with the internal. Mm-hmm. And I think where most people start is with the external.
Yeah.
And especially in the horse world. And I feel like I really get the adult amateur woman. And I actually feel like I really get the trainer because I've worked with so many and I have unbelievable compassion for the plight of the trainer, especially right now in our culture. And yes, social media has its benefits, but its curses are just, they are hard to recover from and hard to tolerate. And people are not, they're always trying to put up whatever face on social media. And that external stuff is really, really super challenging. But when I think about like, I clinicked for years, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, like, I don't know, 20 or 30 clinics a year. Like I did a lot of clinics. I spent a lot of time on the road, going to a lot of different barns across the country in Canada, and always saw the same thing. I always saw overmounted, afraid, unprepared, unable adult amateur women. I always saw that. I saw it. Recently I was at a clinic just visiting a friend and saw it, and the trainer riding the horse and the owner going to the clinician, am I going to be good enough to ride this horse soon? And I think that, like, why do women get into the sport? Because they love their horses, right? It's whatever, the fantasy, the black beauty, black stallion, whatever it is, you grow up with that. And then you buy this giant, 17 to hand 3-year-old warm blood that, and the trainer's like, hold my beer because I'm going to get you on this horse soon. And it's just not. And I think that if we did have a better sense of what we were looking for internally, then I think we'd have a better way to monitor and maybe even restrict what it is we get influenced by externally.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, yeah. And then you have like it helps keep your, like your radar a little cleaner, right? This works, this doesn't work for me because I've already like addressed or associated like what my internal motivator is. Because it's interesting. I talked to Kim Severson, who has individually medaled at the Olympics, won Kentucky 3 times. And her main thing is like, you got to have self-belief. You got to have self-belief. And she's just like a really strong person. And that's what I asked. I was like, well, what if you don't? Like, can it be learned? Can it be? And, we both kind of contemplated and went back on and forth on that a little bit, but absolutely. Right. Like,
oh my God, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Like at the core of the definition of belief it's a habitual thought. You just have thought it for so many years and you believe it to be so true that you forget that it's just a thought.
Interesting.
That's really, yeah, thank you.
I'm quoting you. I'm writing it.
It's really, it's funny because I wrestle with this self-belief, like, am I good enough for all this stuff? And sometimes when I open my mouth, I'm like, well, who wants to hear this anyway? And am I sure it's right? Or is this going to help somebody? Am I going to sound like an idiot? All those things rattle around, and I've been doing this long enough and it has stopped me so much in my life that I've just really always worked on it. Like how I was working with an Olympian, and we were talking about confidence, and another one, not you, but and it's, you think an Olympian, right? But everyone has that, and I've worked with Olympians in 2004, 2008, 2012, 20, whatever it was, 18, 20, 21, whatever, like the different. So I've been around that game for long enough, and they all have those confidence worries, right? And it does all come down to, like we call them core beliefs in psychology. And really those are things that set early on, when you're young, so here's a little developmental psychology lesson for you with your child. Between the ages of 2 and 7, where our brain is in this wave state called theta, which is, for adults, that's the theta wave state is like when we're like just about falling asleep. And it's kind of like magical and dreamy almost, right? You start to drift in and out, and you just feel really good and peaceful and calm. And kids have like that magical thing to them, and they're so full of imagination and curiosity, and it's because their brain is in that state. But it's also a highly impressionable state. And so you hear something, your parent says to you, you're the best, or you suck. And then they say it 2 or 3 more times, and then they say it 12 or 15 more times, and then you believe it. And then you say it, 12 or 15 billion times before you're 30.
Right.
Right. And so then we've got this super neural network around whatever it is you believe about yourself. And so unpacking that's where the work is, and secretly that's the work that I do with everybody that I work with, which is how do we unpack and unravel and sort of get down to that core piece. And that's where, the data stuff is really important. Like, what can you actually do? What can't you actually do? And most people cannot answer that question. What are you good at?
Right.
I'm not really sure. Okay. You've made 12 Olympic teams. What are you really good at?
Yeah.
So I think that it's, the belief part. And some people are super lucky. I worked with a guy in the corporate world, and he's like, well, why would you ever think a negative thought about yourself? And I'm like, I just want to kill you right now.
Yeah.
Like, God damn you. And he was just, like, I don't know, is he still in that theta state? He was just magical anyway, and just really beautiful and wonderful to be around. But he was like, why would you want to think a negative thought? And I'm like, oh my God, we're at that easy. But we're, we form these neural pathways and these networks around our negative thoughts, and then those turn into beliefs. Beliefs, we're not pre-wired. You can't cut someone open and find their belief somewhere.
Right.
You know, it's something that we, but they're like that. They're like that sticky you put on your bathroom mirror, reminding you to take your vitamins, right? And you see it for what, the first week,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it becomes part of the bathroom mirror,
Right.
right? And then that's it. It's part of the bathroom mirror, right? Because you've seen it enough. You don't notice it again until the glue fails and it falls off the bathroom mirror. And then you're like, and it falls down behind the sink. And so you don't even, and you're like, wasn't there something there?
Wasn't I supposed to do something?
Wait, wasn't there something in that spot?
Yeah.
But then immediately you fill that spot, right? So the brain's really funny that way. So being intentional about that sticky and moving it around every day and changing the color until that sticky really sticks and you know, and becomes part of you and not just the mirror. That's the real challenge, and that's where the work is, and that's where we lose. It's harder, right? Because the brain loves a good pattern, so it's going to go, I think that sticky's not true. I have this whole stack of evidence over here that sticky, that you can, that you're awesome, that you're worthy, that's I don't think that's true, because over here, look at all this.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's where we get super stuck. And we just don't have the tools, because we're not raised around that. We're not raised to decipher and sort of tease out what our beliefs are.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. And when you talk about it, like, I was looking on your website, and one of the taglines on there says heart, science, performance, which I love. And you just flowed through that really nicely, because I think one of the things that helps with that is knowing that the science and the neuroscience behind it. Like, I know that helped me a lot when you broke some things down. You're like, this is how the brain works. And you can change this, you know, if you practice it. It's a workable, fixable, malleable thing, as opposed to like, this is just who I am, you know, like, this is just what I am, you know, like, if you actually do this work, you know, like the heart part, like, what's my why? What's my motivation? Like, why am I doing this? The science part to back up that it matters. And then the performance part, like, if you spend this time and do the work, the performance will improve. Like, that will get better, you know. And I think until you, like you said, do kind of the work, like, it's more motivating to do the work when you know that it works. You know? End quote. Mic drop.
You know what? That is so awesome. And I think that something that really gets in the way of us getting to that performance piece is that often we don't know what the process looks like. Right? Yeah. So I was just talking with Meta about this morning. Ann Gribbins was the chef to keep when I was the sports psychologist for the US team in 2012. And Meta has known her for a very long time, rode with her in high school. And wow. she is masterful.
Yeah.
You know, like, on the ground as a coach. She's an O judge, you know, may have even been the head of the grand jury. You know, she's like, there's not many that can come close and to her. And a couple of years ago, Meta she took Stedinger.
Oh, right.
And she was taking a lesson with Anne, and I was watching, and I'm like, and Anne was like this, she was really focused on whatever, I don't know what they were doing, maybe canter pirouettes. And it was like, Anne was like, stay with it. Now add this, and now add that. And yes, almost. And every once in a while she'd say, almost. And Meta was just like, believed, right? She just said, I'm going to put all my eggs in this faith basket, and I'm just going to, you know, wax on, wax off. I'm going to do exactly what as close as I can do. You know, and I don't even know if Meta could see the end game or not. I couldn't, you know, I'm not that kind of rider. But then all of a sudden it was like, boom.
Right.
There was the moment. And Anne goes, yes.
Right.
You know, like a conductor, you know, like it was just like, she was just and so many people can't have that kind of blind faith and just do it. Like when I give someone like meditate every day.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Right.
because they don't know. But then when they do it for 3 months, and they do 90 days in a row, then they call me and they're like off their rocker, like, you cannot believe what just happened. I'm like,
You're like, yes, I can. Yeah.
right. And so when we don't know what the process looks like, that's why schoolmasters are brilliant. I had a conversation with a woman this morning and she's like, I do not want to spend $100,000 on a schoolmaster. I'd rather buy a young horse for $100,000 and be able to ride longer. And I'm like, no,
Right.
no. If you've got the $100,000 to spend on the schoolmaster, you spend it, because then they're teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
You need to learn. You need to know what the process looks like. And we jump ahead. We think we can skip steps. And I don't know how to soapbox that any louder or any firmer. Like, even when I'm learning something, but I know, intellectually, that I don't know what the process looks like,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that I want that end game. I want that end result. And so I'm going to stick in there and I'm going to go, okay, this person has that end result that I seek. They're taking me to that end game. I'm going to just hang on, buckle up, and I'm going to go for the ride, and I'm going to do what they tell me to do.
Right.
Even though I don't know the process, I'm going to trust that it's going to work, put everything into it. And then, when doesn't it work? It just works, right? If someone's already done it and they're guiding you through it, then it works.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure where we lose that ability to not know. I think that's one of our great challenges is, and I think as women, finding people to trust, I think is problematic, and our sport, our English equestrian sport has, deceit is the rule rather than the exception. And that's problematic. And I'm not sure how to
and I think it's really hard too, because, like we had talked about this for some time, having some way, and I do think there's some change, like there's in our, in eventing anyway, there's a new instructor certification. Like they just totally revamped the whole thing, and it's actually really quite good. It's the best it's ever been. But I think the trainer, because like I am a woman and I've dealt with fear and pressure and all of this stuff. And there was a whole bucket of stuff, and I'm sure there's buckets loads more that I was unaware of, and things that in the last, 3, 4, 5 years in getting to know you and your crew, and like things that have just come to my attention and I've been able to work through, that now I can see a little bit clearer as a trainer. But you feel like you need to not only understand the horse psychology and behavioralists, but you need to have a certain understanding of human psychology. And that just because somebody's not like you doesn't mean that their fear doesn't matter, or it maybe takes a different shape, or their comments back to you aren't really what they're saying. It's more what they're feeling in the moment, and being able to weave through that in a way that you're not just, again, falling back on how, I was brought up, and some people were brought up to just tough it out. Like, kick on, like you'll get over it and then you'll get braver. But often that doesn't happen. It's the same thing with horses. Like, you kind of go as fast as you can at this ditch and you get to the other side of it. I've rarely found a horse that's braver. They just might be more scared of me, but like there's a difference between, true understanding and getting something, and then just kind of surviving and getting to the other side, figuratively and literally. But as a trainer, that's quite difficult to harmonize those two things.
Oh man, I think it's crazy difficult, because you spend so many hours with your students and clients, and so many hours, so many intense hours, like there can be an intense period of time every single time you're on a horse, and there can be fear and what, especially, well, I like anything but dressage, jumping but dressage can be scary too,
Yeah,
depending on
yeah.
what's going on. And
You have to sit the trot. Wah!
yeah, you're so funny. But but you're right. It's not like just to push through like that. Never actually changes things. And I'm wondering how you related, like if you related to the fear in your clients early on in your career when you were truly sort of bulletproof, fearless, if you were able to do that early on, or if that's just something you developed over time.
No, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, I certainly was like, oh, come on, I would get short-tempered, but it's funny though, because if you think about some of the things you get the most like frustrated and short-tempered, it's because you recognize something in yourself that sees the same and you had to get over it. Like I had to do that. So kick on, like, so no, I don't think I recognized it until getting to a point, especially with fear, where I had some like real significant issues with it and spent about a year or two really having to work through and create some tools around that. And then once I kind of had a little bit of a skill set of my own, I felt like I had something to offer, where before I really didn't have any skill set around that. I recognized it, I could see it, but the only way I knew how to deal with it was just to get on with it, And so that's what I offered, is you take my, whatever that, it's confidence probably isn't the right word, but like you're here paying me for my lesson. And so I'm going to tell you to get on with it, and you'll just have to steal some of my bravery and get on with it. But, like I'm on the ground. And I'm quite happy now. Like I do it all the time. If I go to take a lesson and I'm uncomfortable with something, I just say, these stirrups are adjustable. Can you just show me? And get off.
Oh my God. That's the best line. These stirrups are adjustable.
And I do. I mean, I did it 2 weeks ago. And it wasn't a fear related thing, but it was something I just couldn't see the picture. I could hear and it made sense what I was being told to do, but I did not feel confident that I could do it, nor that I could see it going there. And so I just said, good luck to you. And went on with that. But it was somebody I very much trusted. But no, I don't think I could recognize, like now it feels very empowering to have something else to offer. It feels better. When we were talking about earlier, that feeling, like I hate if I get into a situation with human or horse where I feel like emotionally elevated in a negative way, where I feel like I have to use a little blunt force or, callousness or something. It's not nice. Whereas when you have another way to help, it feels right. But I mean, it's having that. I mean, it doesn't feel, it feels very archaic. Like we had talked about earlier, that there's not a lot of that information out there for trainers to see, recognize, and give some help that way.
It's really not. And I think that one of my favorite stories is I was at a barn with a Grand Prix dressage trainer. She was just like, I mean, fear wasn't even, I don't even know if she could spell it. Like, she grew up in Virginia galloping, like bareback, probably bridleless, on a stallion. Am I blowing this up enough? Through the fields, in a hurricane. There.
There, that did it. I got it. I see it.
That sums it up, right? Like, and just like completely just consummate and probably not afraid enough ultimately. Right. And super caring, loving, crazy, terrific woman. But she had no idea what fear meant and why anyone would ever experience fear on a horse. And I was trying to explain it to her, and she was like, but no, that horse is going to be fine. That horse is going to be fine. And I was like, can you swim? And she's like, oh God, no, absolutely not. And I'm like, all right, you and I are going to go we're going to hop on a flight right now. We're going to jump off in Australia, and we're going to jump off on Bell's Beach, which is like the top surfing beach. Surf's about, 10 to 12 foot faces, which means about 15 feet on the backside of the wave. We're just going to go have a little swim. Don't worry, you'll be fine. And she's like,
good one.
She goes, oh my God, I got nauseous just listening to you describe those waves. And I'm like, that's every client you have here today.
Right. Good for you.
And she was like, right. It gave her some way to connect to it. And I think it's really, really hard because trainers are not psychologists, and it's not fair to make them that. It's really not fair to make them that. And that was the thing that I heard across the board the most. Like, no matter where I went, the trainer was like, oh my God, I didn't know that. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't, and it was, that's why my heart is like, I have so much compassion and understanding and even gratitude for trainers that they do what they do, without having that skill set and having such a heavy lift, without really just being prepared for it. It's part of why our model's clumsy.
Yeah. And I guess when it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about really like even the student and being an empowered student and knowing your internal motivators, it would help your trainer through those situations and having that conversation and that discussion. And also if you feel like you're getting pushed a little bit past your comfort zone, being able to say that instead of going along with it, going, well, this is how it's always been done. I need to, get on board with this. But having that kind of self-belief and that true, because who was I talking to? It was on another podcast, two people actually on two different podcasts talking about from a young age, moving into a situation, being motivated, and then knowing within kind of the first 3 to 6 months, it wasn't the right place for them, even at a young age, because it didn't feel right. And both people moved on to other situations and became incredibly successful in what they did. And I said, oh my God, how did you know? Like, and and one of them, honestly, it was so funny that you said this about the Black Stallion. Kathy Barr's podcast just came out and she said she grew up watching the Black Stallion. It was this beautiful thing. And that's how she thought everything was. And then she went into a barn and that was not how everything was, that it was really not that feeling. And she said, I lasted there for a very short period of time. And then she ended up seeing some of the Pirelli program. And she's like, that looks more like what I thought. Like that. More. So I want to be more like that. So it's really interesting. You go back to kind of trust your gut, right? Like, does this feel
not where we started?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's really hard, and I think for women, it's much harder because a lot of times when someone tells you to trust your gut, it's because you have to go against something.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And if you have not ever done that successfully or not been supported through that or not navigated that path before, that is an extraordinary ask. It's just a big ask. And when you tell people, just trust your gut, just do what you feel is right. If you've never done that, that's a lot of courage to muster. And I think that we might not get to that point as frequently if we started off on a path that was more aligned and closer to our heart and our gut. So I think that this, we're winding back down to where we started with, like, the intrinsic motivators. Start there. Start with, what do you want? Why? What does it mean to you? And I do want to, like, plug being competitive as a woman, like, is freaking awesome. Go be competitive, compete your ass off, love it, be hungry, be aggressive, like, that is all 100% awesome, acceptable, and fully woman. Like, women are afraid to be outwardly competitive, and I give you permission right now.
There we go.
Go and be competitive, right? Like, it's just awesome. Yeah. And but if that's not your jam, that's not your jam. Like, I have a horse that meta trained to the Grand Prix. He's a Gribaldi, and he's freaking awesome. And we have never, I don't think I've ever even ridden him in breeches and boots. I wear chaps.
Yeah.
And he and I, like, we have a mad love affair, and he's wonderful. And, but that was my intrinsic, like, internally, like, all I wanted to do was ride and be with him and like that. And I never had that that external motivator. And if I had let people talk me into it, it probably would have really negatively impacted my relationship with my horse.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where we start, like start with the heart, start with where you are, what you want, why you're in this, and find people, at least one people, find people who are gonna stand with you, stand next to you and say, yeah, that's good. And that's right. And you can do that. And I'm gonna stand beside you, stand behind you, or in front of you and drag you with me. And, all it takes is one. And then each success you build upon. Confidence is an emotion and it is a byproduct of a successful event. So if you're a woman and you're trying to muster the confidence to do something, you're going backwards. What you want to do is you want to create the skills, practice, develop the capacities, go try a piece of it, not the whole thing, get a little bit of success. And then you go, woo, that feels awesome. Then you go to the next, right? And it builds, right? Everything's a staircase, everything's a ladder. And you got to take no skipping steps.
Right. No, 100%. And I think that it's so interesting that you say that, because I have another friend / client that was out here the other day, and she's very competitive, and she's like number one novice rider, amateur rider in the country or something. She wins all the time. And she is competitive. It's like out, and she's like, I'm sorry, I wish I wasn't this way. I'm not, I study the courses and I walk 10 times. And she said to me, she was in a situation. She said, it's really hard because a couple of people I were around were like, oh, well, aren't you going to do this? Aren't you going to move up? Aren't you going to, oh, you're just going to win everything. You're just here for that. And made her almost feel bad about it, but she's like, she has a full-time job, she's
in her zone.
And she's like, when I'm down here doing this, she's down here for like 10 days at a time. She's like, I'm doing all the competitions. I'm taking all the lessons. I'm showing up. I walk my novice course 5 times. Like, I'm here to be competitive. And I'm like, you go on, girl, but it was interesting because I think she's actually quite unique for somebody. She's still apologizing for it, but she'd at least say it out loud, like she'd at least say, but she's still saying, I'm sorry, I wish I wasn't this competitive. I'm like, why? Like like that. I said, you sound like me at the when I go to Kentucky, I walk that course 5 times. I'm not here to be an also ran. Like, I do the homework. I'm not walking around saying I'm going to win this thing, but I certainly am not there just to, go to the trade fair. I mean, the trade fair is great, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, there is this thing, but I think it is unique. And you feel like you can't say it out loud a lot of the times. And then you've got the it's like this pull in between, because on the other side, you've got people that are feeling the same pressure, like they need to compete, they need to do stuff, and they don't really want to, they're just doing it because somebody told them they're supposed to. So it's like, I think that's awesome to kind of take that time for yourself and sit down and figure out your intrinsic motivation, and then connect with people that align with that. Because that, I think probably once you see that, it's easier. You can at least tell the people that really don't align with it. Like, it's pretty easy to say like, nah.
Yeah. Those red flags are usually pretty red.
Yeah. If I tell this person my intrinsic motivation, are they going to laugh me out of the room? No, you're out. I'm like, you got to go. I don't know. I think we could have this conversation for a very long time.
Always.
I know. Well, this has been awesome. I mean, I think this really is exactly the conversation. And I think that's probably one of the best places to start and that is really the goal. And one of the goals of this podcast is to speak to people and experts like you, that we can just get the conversation started and let people know that we're having these conversations, and we don't actually have all the answers. We're just having the conversations and having fun dissecting it a bit and trying to pull it apart and figure out where we all fit in this thing.
Yeah. And I don't know, like, are they answers, or are they just, like more unraveling of the questions? There's 1,000 roads to Rome. I love that saying. And so there's a lot of different ways to find yourself inside of all of this. And whatever, like I always talk about those moments that things that make you go, or thoughts that go thunk.
Yeah.
Like if you had a thought that went thunk, follow it, go with it. That's how you start. Like we suppress those moments where we connect with that, and then we just get really good at that, and then we get stuck up here and we forget about all this important stuff down here, and you need it going back and forth.
Yeah.
So.
And like, do you think for people, what would be a realistic start to the, so if people listen to this, when people listen to this podcast,
if anybody tunes in,
and
they
get off, and they get off this and they're like, that is really inspiring, I'm motivated. How would you tell people to kind of start this journey? Like, how would you tell them to start exploring?
I would tell them to start looking at their intrinsic, their internal, inside motivators. And so the motivation is a tough word, but it would be like desires, wants, wishes, even dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that you don't want to tell anyone. Those are good. Those are things to listen to, the ones you don't want to tell anyone. And then you look at, okay, between here and there, what's in the way? And is that navigate a bowl? Is that a word?
Mm-hmm. Navigate. Yeah. I mean, without the
Can you navigate that?
Like, where's the bowl?
Bowl.
I was like, wait a second. Yeah.
So to really start with here and what's inside. And then, there's goodies. Like the goodies are the external motivators,
Mm-hmm.
like you get to post that on social media because you did it and it's true. Or you get that ribbon or that plaque or that award. Or, you get that acknowledgement or that new client or that new horse or whatever it is, like there's, you go for it. And then there's always the what
Mm-hmm.
you get from it. Those external motivators, listen, they're important and they're awesome. Right. Like I think something like making a team is it's hard to tease whether it's internal or external because it's so much of both.
Right.
But if you're, like if you're starting out and you're like, God, I really want to have a horse. I want to be able to ride a sitting trot. I want to show first, second, third level. I want to get my bronze medal in dressage. I want to be able to go around cross country, even if it's what's the lowest level in cross country?
Starter.
Okay. What's up from that?
Beginner novice.
Yeah. Right? So there you go. Right. There's 2 levels right there. Boom. But you look and you see like what's in your heart and what do you want to do? And then what's in the way and then what's realistic. And sometimes there's just life happens and it gets in the way. And that's okay. What's another goal?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm never going to make an Olympic team. That was a goal for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to make an Olympic team as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much other stuff I can do that's great.
Right.
It can make me happy and fulfill and make me feel whole and complete. And,
right. You just change things a little bit.
Yeah. So start with what's inside. Really what's inside. Do it quietly, be alone, be private, have a space where you can do this, where you're not interrupted, where you're not exposed, where you're not influenced by the external stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And just like really sit with yourself. And it may take 5 days in a row of sitting down with paper and pen to really uncover what it is that you want to pursue. Then you put your plan together. Most people start with a plan and, I've got to have this or I should be that. But that's putting the cart before the horse. And we can say that on an equestrian podcast.
Yes, we can.
I don't know. Do you think that helps?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think, and it's kind of like almost like allowing yourself to go in and have some abstract thoughts and time and write any of it down. And explore that for a little bit and then go back and fill in the blanks. It's funny. It's like, I just got that visual of when you're in school and you're learning like sentence structure and how to start and finish a paragraph. And then you just fill in the blanks. But it's like, this is like, start the opposite way. Like, start writing sideways and with marker and all these thoughts.
Show us your pad.
Nope. There's a lot of coloring. But, and then go back in and put the structure around it, and I think I still obviously journal a lot. And I remember you telling me like some stuff is just for me and some stuff is for the trash and some stuff you keep, but it just gets it out of your head and onto some paper and it'll start to take shape. It always starts to take some type of shape. What that shape is. That's the journey.
Right. Profound.
Well, I've had you on this call for an hour and 23 minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up for because I'm sure you have plenty of things to do, but I did give you a long lead time with some questions that I sent you.
Yes, like
6 minutes.
3 minutes.
Maybe it was 3:26 when I sent them. 4 minutes. But we do like to wrap up our show with a few of these questions, and you can definitely hit a pass if you can't think of anything off the top of your head. But this circles back a little bit to you because we've been talking about everything else. So
I'm not used to that, so.
I know. You're like, wait, who? All right. So we're going to start with number 1. What is the biggest lesson a horse has taught you about yourself?
What is the biggest? There's been so many huge, massive lessons. I think that that my horse, I have a couple right now. But really what they all seem to teach me is about my confidence. Right. And the funny thing is like when I was competing in swimming, I was like a big extrovert, right? And I swam sprint events. So I'd be jumping around and singing behind the blocks. Like that's what I needed to get my energy up. And I remember after we retired, I was having dinner with a friend that I competed against. And she's like, you used to scare the out of me, Susser. And I'm like, I did. She's like, yeah, you were so confident. And I was like, just couldn't believe, like that just slayed me. And I look at my horse, any of them, and they're just so phenomenal, but especially my Gribaldi Majestic, like, and I just think he's just got to be bubbling with confidence. Right. And then I ask him to jump a barrel and he's like, I can't.
Yeah.
And it was, we had like this, it was like this journey that he and I went on to jump a barrel, and it was really a huge challenge for him. And he didn't think he could do it. And it took weeks, like seriously online. And he didn't think he could do it. And he didn't think he could do it. And when he did it, Sinead, he jumped up in the air, like gleefully, like literally full of glee. And I was like, wow. And that was a moment that was, like one of those moments, like he had to figure out he could do it before he could feel confident.
Yeah.
That was
big moment.
Big moment for me.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. It's funny. It's like what you visually see is just the first impression, but it's not, often it's so far from what's underneath from the truth. Right. And, we know that about ourselves, more than anybody else, but then somehow we hold horses or other people to a different standard, like they're different, where it's a good lesson to just take that second glance or that second thought or recognize that maybe you have no idea. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a favorite training or mantra that you reference regularly? And it could be one that you give to people.
Me having faith in me.
I like that.
There, never told anyone that out loud.
Faith in me. I like that. It's your habitual thought, your self-belief. I put a box around that. I put a quote. I like it.
It's hard. I have a ton of self-doubt too. People like it never goes away, but I'm always working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a powerful thing to share. I think that the conversation and sharing that is just so huge, and people from hearing it from people as successful as you, and knowing that is still something that you're working on and mastering. And it's like, I was reading this book And it was a book on shamanism, and it was talking about how these like children got recognized at a young age, like how they would get recognized in our society as having like a learning disorder, and they would get recognized as having actually special gifts, and then they'd go and work under a shaman for 10 years or 15 years. And the comparison honestly was that like and then obviously they became shaman and helped the community, but it was also kind of talking about it's like having if you're an alcoholic and your sponsor, if they weren't an alcoholic, they don't really get it,
Yeah.
and that your sponsor gets it, and that's why they can help you through those situations. And it's like, what makes you so excellent at what you do and being around people is that you're so relatable and people can relate to you, and you are genuine and honest with where you're at as well. And you've worked through those things. And I think that's such a powerful thing. And the more that we can get comfortable with, it's not necessarily a problem. It's like what you said earlier, it's all just part of who we are, and exploring. Some days are good, some days are bad. And, we can always get better and evolve. But it's really powerful to hear someone like you say that. So that's my long-winded way of saying thanks.
Right back at you, Sinead. You're pretty honest about you, and that is, I can't tell you how many people I've heard be moved by that and changed by that. So
well, there's just you and I on here, so nobody's listening.
Nobody's listening.
No. There's no one in the audience, so we can just talk freely. Is there a piece of advice that someone gave you along the way that you still reference today?
It's so funny. I've had so many amazing mentors, and my college swim coach, her name's Cindy Gallagher, and she coached at UCLA, I think for 31 or 32 seasons. She just retired a couple years ago. And I can't remember exactly how she said it, but so I had an injury my freshman year, and I had so much pressure on myself and worrying, and freshman year, and am I going to make it? And, I was a walk-on, and almost everybody else had a scholarship, and I didn't feel like I belonged or anything like that. And I was just coming back. It was my first swim meet back after missing like a month from a shoulder injury and a bad tendonitis. And I was freaking out. She could see it. It was like like a silly little dual meet at home, and it wasn't a big deal. And she's like, listen, she sees me like unraveling, and she comes up and she puts her arm around my shoulder, and she goes, you don't have to break the world record today.
Wow.
And yeah.
Huge.
And like, I know that sounds like really like a silly piece of advice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You don't have to break the world record today, but I can't tell you how many times since then, which was 1985, that has gone through my mind.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you don't have to break the world record today. Like, and I swam great. Like I was in lane 8. I won my heat. I won my race. It was like, outside.
And I did actually break the world record.
I did actually break the world record. Yeah. It was, so that would probably be up there. Yeah.
Well, that feels like one of those things that when you feel yourself getting into that total elevated self spiral, like impending doom, that bit would just get you back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have to break the world record today. Like, it was just so clever. Yeah. She was
perfect timing.
amazing.
Yeah. Talk about some delivery. What do you do when you are seeking inspiration?
What do I do when I am seeking inspiration? I have to move my focus from me to others. Like the thing that inspires me is the impact that it has on other people. Like how can this make a difference for you or for someone else or for that community, or for, like, when I think about what goes on in the horse world, I'm like both frustrated and inspired at the same time that we could change, we could make some change in this culture, that we could create a better place for all that, like a better working model. Like, and when I think about, the work that there is to do, I have to think about how it's going to impact someone else or the community, or
That's awesome.
just not me.
Well, you'll get the benefit of the inspiration. That's really cool. That's really powerful. It's nice to have or not nice, but it's good work to have something when you're feeling like that. Like I always find this question really interesting, because I think often like that inspiration and motivation are kind of like together, like when I feel a little bit unmotivated or I need something to inspire me, like it's good to have your kind of go-to thing. Like, what do I need to do to get out of this funk? That's really cool. Okay. And we're getting to our last one. Have you had an experience or an adversity separate from horses that you feel has directly influenced you as a horseman?
Well, so my relationship to myself as a horseman, because both my internal and my external are very playful. Like I don't really have anything at stake with regards to that. But I think the one thing that has just probably been the greatest adversity that I've ever, that I've dealt with across my lifespan is my sexuality and being gay. And
what?
I
had no idea.
Don't tell anyone. Ned and I are just friends.
Just us on this call.
I love you, Sinead.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
That was awesome. Wow, that was great. And just the journey that I had to take to be okay with not only that, but me, and not worry about. That's the one time when I had to really not worry about what other people were thinking and feeling. And when you can put that aside, someone thinking you ride like crap, not a big deal.
You're like, you got nothing.
Yeah, you think that's bad? Hold my beer.
I love it. Well, I mean, it is wild, right? Like it's one of those things that, again, that when you have to go through something so powerful and, raw as that, then, it almost like, it sounds like a little bit, then the horses become such a peaceful, playful place. Like I was reading something the other day that was really kind of cool about horses, because it was, have you read that Horse Brain, Human Brain book? But there was one part in it that she said something along the lines of horses are emotional beings without judgment. Yeah. Which I thought was really cool, because, obviously the whole frontal lobe thing, but it makes it
done.
I'm using my words. But it was it makes, I don't know. I feel like a lot, you end up being a lot more at peace with them and in certain situations, which makes you a better horseman and a more understanding, especially, sometimes the more that you've been through and the more raw you've been in certain situations, you get over into that with the horses. And there's just a lot of understanding and a lot of depth there that, comes from experiences out completely away from the animals,
Wow. Yeah. Life is holographic. So if it happens in one area, it tends to happen in another. And that's why there's so much that we can get from that, the beauty and the purity of that relationship, because they don't judge, and they're so darn forgiving, because they don't have the frontal lobe to hang on to that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Cool. That frontal lobotomy.
Don't try that at home, kids.
No, do not. That's for another podcast. Well, this has been so awesome, Jenny. I really am so happy that you made the time to come on here just for us to have this chat.
I know, right? Did they tape this? Is this going live?
No, I have no idea. I don't know what the Spotify thing is. But this has been wonderful. I think our listeners are going to really gravitate to this, and I certainly will listen to it again. And I don't really listen to any of these, but because I can't listen to myself talk, but I feel like this is really powerful as always. And I love chatting with you and kind of investigating all this stuff. So let's make a habit of it. Let's do this again.
I'm down with that. Totally.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And if people want to check out your website, where do they go?
drjenny.com. Just drjenny.com. I know, right? Super challenging.
I love it. All right. Well, I think you're going to get a lot of hits on that. All right. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, much appreciated.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Sinead.
Thanks.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Before you go, I just want to let you know more about Ride IQ. At its core, Ride IQ gives everyone access to instruction from the best equestrian coaches in the world. It might sound impossible, but with Ride IQ, you get access to the private mobile app that has hundreds of on-demand, listen while you ride audio lessons taught by top riders and coaches in eventing, hunter jumpers, and dressage. Here's how it works. You look through the app and choose a lesson based on your horse or a skill you're working on. There are lessons for green off-the-track thoroughbreds and nervous horses and horses that are behind the leg, as well as lessons that teach every stage of skills like shoulder in or trot lengthenings. Then you tack up and press play, and you have a top coach like Doug Payne or Leslie Law or Gina Smith in your ear guiding you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, it is always appreciated if you can take a moment to share the podcast with your friends and family and leave a review on your podcast app. The best way to support the podcast is to become a Ride IQ member at ride-iq.com. And when you do, we hope you're excited to see that In Stride is just one of multiple podcast shows on the app, including hack chats, conversations with coaches, and more. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week, and please do press follow or subscribe on whatever podcast platform you listen on. And as always, remember to pat your horse.